Hello and welcome to TNCRadio.live. This is Keep On Talkin' with your host, Tom Kirk. Tom is an over-the-road driver with over 2 million safe miles. On this show, he interviews the people who help make the trucking world happen. It's real life, live from the road.
In this episode, Tom Kirk continues his interview with Jerry Fritts, who's a third-generation owner-operator with over 40 years of freight experience and over 4 million miles of safe driving. Jerry's hauled it all and been all over the U.S. and Canada, including the Yukon Territories and Alaska. He was one of the first drivers to receive the Citizen Driver Award by Travel Centers of America. Sit back and enjoy this great episode on Keep On Talkin'.
Let's start off with, I'm joined today by Jerry Fritts. Jerry, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in trucking?
All right. Born 1946. So that makes me 75 years old today. And I was born and raised at a dairy farm, a family dairy farm. In fact, we just found some pictures here today. I knew they were around. Okay, when did you get started in trucking, really? In addition to being dairy farmers, we're also cattle dealers in grain and hay and stuff like that. So we had 2 trucks in addition to the farm machinery. And this question has been asked before, and I found it today. My father, when did you first begin to somehow see the something of driving? We have a picture of me wrapped up in little blankets, is not more than a newborn baby, sitting on my father's lap on my first articulated vehicle. Now, some people, what do you mean an articulated vehicle? All 2-piece vehicle, tractor and trailer. Well, this so happens was a farm-age tractor pulling a manure spreader, or just full of humor. But it had to be backed up and handled pretty much the same way.
Yep.
It shows my father holding me in little blankets and stuff. Somehow or other, I'd put my hand out to touch the steering wheel on that farm-age. So really, I started my driving career within weeks of being born. Like
you might have the record for the longest driving career. I'm not even going to try and challenge that one.
Okay. And by the way, I like having fun. So in our conversations here, I would like to, even when we get to the business side, I like to put a little fun into it, lighten it up too. Life can sometimes be too serious. Okay.
Exactly. And I think sometimes as drivers we take ourselves a little too seriously, so a little humor is always good. So, okay, we've established that you started driving at least farm tractors at an extremely early age. Right. When do you remember first getting involved with the regular trucking side, and how did you do that?
Okay. Now, naturally, growing up on the farm, we had the trucks and this, that, and the other thing. So, we're only 3rd, 4th grade. We're already operating farm machinery. We take the K7 and K8 International. We could back it in. We get them started. So you gain those basic skills. And they weren't tractor and trailers. Now, when did I actually begin into the tractor and trailer? Well, farming was dying. My father, in the late 50s, had actually transitioned into driving tractor and trailer. Pretty much the same as working farm machinery, no big deal. So I had been around it, and my father and I were very, very close. I was the firstborn son, so, it's normal. And I was also kind of obsessed about trucking, too. I'd already ridden in them and all that kind of stuff. Kind of knew the routines going into the cattle auctions and, all that kind of stuff. That a lot of people, it's hard for them to learn that in this business. A lot of us take it for granted. So now we had moved to the city. I was raised out around Alamucci, New Jersey. Went to a 5-room schoolhouse, believe it or not, for New Jersey. It was like being in the middle of Iowa. And it was the farming culture. So we moved into the city to be closer to Dad's work. And I graduated high school and started college nights. We didn't have enough money to go full-time. Or, there were no college loans or anything then. And in the meantime, I'd taken a job in a warehouse. And I'm actually running the crew now. But we needed trailers moved all the time, so they had somebody, and sometimes he wouldn't be around to do it. So one day I said, well, I know I could do that. I know how to push that button in. And I'd never backed up a tractor trailer. But I knew kind of what you needed to do. I went out there. It was an old 54 auto car gas burner with an 8-speed transmission running 45 miles an hour wide open. That truck had more steel in the front bumper than most trucks have in a whole truck today. No power steering. Yeah, no power steering, nothing like that. Well, man, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. And I could still see this. I went out that day, hooked up to one of the 35-foot trailers. And I said, I know I can get that to the dock. So I had to pull up, back up, and I knew kind of had to turn one way to get it to go the other. And after 4 or 5 times, I'll be darned. See, I didn't know how to read mirrors. I got that thing to the dock. So the owner comes back and he says, how'd I get your trailer? I said, I did it. Did you did that? I said, I did that. So moving along now, as time moves on, they decide we can use a second truck there even. So Casey buys another one. I get paid by the company, drive his truck. And this is approximately 1964, 65. I think I'm making $2.42 an hour now. Running a shipping operation, which, by the way, that's important because I knew about bills of lading and so on and so forth. So now I'm getting an inside look of transportation. And also I'm taking traffic management and transportation law classes at night, Charlie Dickinson University. So watch how this all kind of comes together at some point. I'm getting pretty good with this tractor trailer thing, man. I back up from the blind side. Other people are coming in there to pick up at our place. I've had to get up in their trucks and back their trucks in for them. Yeah, and I'm only 18, 19 years old. So at one point, Casey Chiesi's like my second father, my big mentor. And he said, why don't you go down to White Scarver? It was a contract carrier for Grand Union Grocery Firm, big grocery outfit up east. Now, in New Jersey, they didn't have regulated transportation, so you did not have to be 21 years old. We'll put that in parentheses for another day about should we let 18-year-olds drive truck. So move on. I went down there, and I'll be darned they hired me. So, and I'm going to take night loads out, the 5 o'clock in the evening loads, because sometimes in freight's heavy, they didn't have enough full-time drivers. And that paid me $3.62 an hour, almost $28 for 8 hours. Now,
and what year was that, Jerry?
That was 1965.
And for those who are around my age or probably a little younger, I'm guessing that was pretty good money for 1965.
That was top of the market. It was a union job. And also, see, I'm working 8 hours or more in the warehouse operation, only a mile away. So this is my part-time job. Now, I'm going to college 2 nights a week, too. Or sometimes 3, sometimes Saturday mornings, depending, you know. And anyhow, all I had to do for that was to jump in a gas burner Broadway that'd run about 48 miles an hour wide open down a New Jersey turnpike. It was a single axle, back under brand new 40-foot trailers, 40 feet. And so all I had to do was drag one of those trailers down to one of the supermarkets, back in, roll the doors up, and unload by hand off the floor 40 to 45,000 pounds of freight, 3,000 to 4,000 pieces. Summer nights, 100, 110 degrees. And by the way, that was a premium job because it's what we call a house job. In other words, they're a contract carrier. So if you work for a trucking company, you may have to make 15, 20 stops a day, deliveries, and 8 or 10 coming back in. And this was go out, come back, you know, really structured. And the owner knew you real well and so on and so forth. A lot of people, I use the phrase, would die to get on a job like that. Well, I got a girlfriend, too. So when I found out I was guaranteed 8 hours pay, other guys were taking a full 8 hours. Man, I'd go up to the Garden State Plaza, I'd throw off 3,000 or 4,000 pounds in 3 hours or so, never lift my head up. Those rollers never stop rolling. Run back to the terminal, I'd be back to the terminal by 9, 10 o'clock at night. Wow. Girlfriend lived right down the road. Things are a lot more conservative those days, so if I get back early enough, I get down there, get a little hugging and smooching, throw a little humor into it. So, and still be to work at 7 o'clock the next morning on my regular job. So at some point, I can remember it was in February, and to get on those union jobs, they'd work you 29 days or so to see how you're working. Because when you got hired on, they were lifetime jobs. It was called making the list.
Industry movement Trucking Moves America Forward is telling the story of the industry. Our safety champions, the women of trucking, independent contractors, the next generation of truckers, and more. Help us promote the best of our industry. Share your story and what you love about trucking. Share images of a moment you're proud of. And join us on social media. Learn more at truckingmovesamerica.com.
And to get on those union jobs, they'd work you 29 days or so to see how you're working. Because when you got hired on, they were lifetime jobs. It was called making the list. And I can remember it was in February. And up east like that, a lot of things have to do with nationalities. A lot of Irish, a lot of Italians here and there, and they tended to go in groups, especially on jobs like that. Well, White Scar was pretty much all Irish, and a lot of them were from the old country. They had the brogue and all that kind of stuff, And you didn't see any fat men. Some of those 45, 50-year-old men that had enough seniority, they were taking 2 loads a day, getting 14 and 15 hours in, 7 or 8 hours in overtime, time and a half, right? But that means they're unloading 80 or 90,000 pounds of freight. There were no fat people on that job. So I'm sitting there one night, and by the way, we had back then what's called tachographs. Everybody gets upset about the ELDs. We had a mechanical device that you had to put a card into at one time and wind it up. That was a tachograph that tracked your RPMs, your speed, and your dwell time, sitting time. So at the end of the day, you came in, and this is a local job. We still had to make out a logbook and submit a tachograph. But remember, you're being paid by the hour.
Yep.
Why are you cheating anyway? See, that's the difference, how your time is paid for. Patty Monahan from the old country comes over, and he says, let's see how I do it, the Irish accent. He says, oh, Jerry, he says, when you get done there, he says, got some paperwork for you to do here. I says, well, Patty, what's the paperwork for? He says, oh, he says, you got your 30 days in. He says, you're going to join the union. That wasn't even my goal. But in those days, let me tell you, a union membership in the Teamsters and trucking was better than a master's degree, especially at 19 years old. So I gave up my warehouse job, went there, but I wanted to run over the road. So I went to a local outfit down there, and there's a hierarchy even among the old union way of getting in. And you can't leave this out of the discussion. Wall Street Journal showed back in the 70s, according to them, 87% of the regulated manufactured goods moved under the Teamster contract. So anyway, I went to what was known as an under-the-hat carrier. Well, they were Italians, and they had a sweetheart deal. They were mob, the Cardinellis. I used to walk into Peter Cardinelli's office, and they had pictures of his father and grandfather down at the racetrack with their long trench coats and derby hats, with a mobster, stuff like that. But it had its purpose. So when you went to work for an under-the-hat outfit, you did not get full union pay. They had it structured different, a couple other things. But you got retirement, medical paid. To this day, my retirement still goes back to that. But it was a start-off job. And it was this way. It was either that's where you started, and if you're a real screw-up, that's where you ended up. For a little fun, watch this. I think I can do it with the accent. So I go down there. I know what I'm getting into. And little old Italian guy from the old country, little round type of guy, you know. Always had that mobster look about him, you know. And he takes me right down through Secaucus there at 358 Mac with a 250 horsepower engine. And he's giving me my road test. Not only that, but this is my indoctrination, so to say. What do they call it now when you bring your in, you know, for your training? And let's see if I can do it with the Italian accent. He says, let me tell you something, sport. He says, around here, he says, I could see you drive. He says, but around here, he says, you got to understand something. He says, you don't see anything, you don't say anything, you don't remember anything. You want to get around along here, keep your mouth shut, your head down, and just do your damn job. Yeah, I can remember going.
That was a pretty effective orientation speech if I've ever heard one.
Yeah, there you go. Orientation. That was my orientation, yeah. So by the time he got me back in, you know, I knew right away I've got to drive this, that, and the other thing. So I stayed there. Their trailers are junk, so I'm worried about wintertime. I'm not going to stay safe and run this junk. But that's the way it started. Tractors are all new. So then I moved over an outfit called Oneida Motor. They ran the long doubles up on the New York Thruway. Well, even there, the tractors were junk. The trailers are pretty good, though. But I went over there, and it's under the hat job, but not too bad now. And every night I would make a 100-mile turn to Easton, Pennsylvania and back with an old B-model Mac with the triplexes and everything. Come back across that New Jersey and run a Philadelphia turn. So I get about 400 miles in every night, this, that, and the other thing. So the way they did that, they scheduled me so I'd back into Carlstadt Terminal around 6 or 7 in the morning. Because many times they didn't have enough city drivers, pickup and delivery drivers, to get all the freight picked up that day. And it went day to day. So I'd come back in the yard, Sam Spina. He was the director of this. Come back in, he'd say, Fritzy, he says, want to do some local work? I said, yeah. He says, okay. They would turn your trip card over, and he would punch it in, put me on the clock. And the road drivers that were willing to work to do pickup and delivery, they gave us truckload pickups or truckload deliveries. Like I used to go down to Johnson & Johnson down south of, that'd be down off exit 9 on the New Jersey Turnpike. So, right. You know, take an empty down there, back in, and being paid by the hour. And get down there, give him a call. He's bring it back to the terminal, come back to the terminal. And then I'd go on home. So I picked up another 3 or 4 hours on the clock. But see, everything was paid for. What a difference that makes to drivers and even the companies. So then I'd get my 8 hours off or so. And they stayed pretty much by some of those rules. You know, you didn't overdo 10 driving. But through that, I got experience on doubles. And, you know, you could even do extra work, stuff like that. And even then, doubles, double 40-footers. And get this, pay back then was about 11, 12 cents a mile. And my wife just discovered pay documents from 1969. I can document what the national pay, the high end of the national pay standard was per mile and per hour back to 1969. But pulling doubles, you only get an extra 3 cents a mile. Pulling that double. We'd be up on the New York Thruway, man. You'd be making 50 miles an hour with an old B-model Mac. But if you had to drop a trailer at Albany and pick another trailer up, you got paid for that. You got 50 minutes drop, 15 minutes drop. That's why people didn't quit these jobs, because everything was paid for. Well, now
Jerry,
yeah.
Quick question for you. You've mentioned this a couple times, like driving on the New Jersey Turnpike, the New York Thruway. Do you remember what the speed limit was back in those days?
Yeah, it was 65 on the New York Thruway.
So 65 on the Thruway, and you were able to do, you said, about 50, correct?
Yeah. Well, you only had like 230 to pull doubles on the New York Thruway. New York State had a law, and they also had a decal you had to have on your tractor, or the company tractor at least. You had to have a minimum of 230 horsepower. So we had the old 673 Max. And some of the carriers were buying 250s and derating them for fuel mileage to 232 horsepower. And by the way, that was not turbocharged. They were naturally aspirated engines. See, most of the trucks today, all the trucks today, have turbochargers. The turbochargers don't increase horsepower so much, but they greatly increase torque.
Trucking Moves America Forward, or TMAF, is building a positive image of trucking by telling the story of the hardworking drivers and industry professionals who support the industry. And you can be a part of it. Learn more about TMAF and how you can join and be a part of the industry movement working to build a strong image of trucking by visiting TMAF's website at truckingmovesamerica.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and our latest channel, TikTok.
When you heard about the jobs so good you had to wait for somebody to die to get the job, true.
Yep.
My father, off the farm and learning to play the game correctly, he had gotten on with a company called Interstate Motor Freight System. They were the 8th largest carrier in the nation at that time. What was known as kind of one of the flagship fleets. They were very innovative, a leader in the industry, one of the go-to carriers for performance and quality and this, that, and the other thing, even for the automotive industry. So the shippers knew they had their groups. For just certain carriers, the ones you want to go to when you want problem solving, Interstate was one of them, and had an outstanding safety record. And in those days, my first day on the job with Interstate Motor Freight, and for quite a while afterwards, I wore a gabardine dry clean uniform with a starched blue shirt and tie, shine boots. You carried a shoe shine kit in your suitcase. Now, here's what happens. On a certain day, the luckiest day of my life, really, that it started off with Oneida didn't run me that night. Freight goes up and down. We're going to see it in this business. Sometimes there just isn't as much freight, so you don't work. And I'd stayed home. Phone rings about 10 o'clock in the morning. It's a collect call from my father. In those days, phone calls from phone booths, wherever, were just terribly, terribly, terribly expensive. And so the operator says, will you accept a collect call? My father says, accept the call, Gerald. That's my real name. It's okay. He didn't hesitate a bit. He says, get down and see Mr. Biggs right away. He says, Scotty just got killed in the mountain up here in Hancock, New York. Well, I instantly knew what that meant. So I knew Mr. Biggs, he was a terminal manager in Interstate Motor Freight because he started their dispatching. So he knew the drivers and his kids. He knew me when I was just a kid. We used to take the trucks around the yard, okay, the old B models. So then he recognized me. But now watch this. You got to go to the standard. Boy, the first thing I did is I got white shirt out, made sure my mother had it all crispy, ironed and everything. Went up to the barber shop, got a good haircut, made sure I shaved real well, shoe shine, really, really, and I didn't wear a tie. It was summertime. Went in dress slacks, dress shoes. That's what they wanted to see. What that said to the big performance-minded people and those kind of flagship carriers, that represents quality to them. Now, why was that so important to them? First of all, they had a market image anyway. But the big thing was they knew when they hired you, kind of due to the union thing, you were going to be there a lifetime, especially with one of the national carriers. Problem was, I was 30 days short of 23 years old. Now, we all know DOT ICC only requires 21, but these companies all had their own standards. Carolina Freight, Helms, some of these others, because they used to write letters. When am I going to get in this and the other? Some of them, they would not put you on the road. They put you to work locally, but you could not be another road driver until you're 27 years old. Consolidated Freightways is 25, one of the top three in the business at one time. Consolidated Freightways used to run a credit check on you. Oh, get this, Oneida, because they're a bonded carrier. Before I pulled my first trip at Oneida, they gave me cash, put me in an intercity bus lines, sent me to downtown Manhattan for a lie detector test. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, first of all, they're a bonded carrier, so they carry a lot more insurance. But they know you could be there a lifetime. So there was virtually hardly any turnover. So Interstate Motor Freight was 30 days short of 23. So Lenny calls Lester Lake. He was a vice president of safety. Lester Lake was a tough guy when it comes to safety. He didn't tolerate any BS. First of all, he didn't have to, because he knew where they were in the industry, they could hire the best in the business and keep them.
Yep.
So he calls Lenny that day. This is how silly I was. Less than 23 years old. Here it is, one of the best. Union jobs are good, but then there were some that were just even extra good, and Interstate was one of those. So he calls Lester Lake. And I had I made out a resume, believe it or not. So it was all handwritten. So Lenny's looking at this. Well, you got pretty good experience. He said, how long have you been in the union? I said, just about 4 years now. He said, really? And so he said, well, you've had some over-the-road experience. So, I got the experience now, a little light on the age. So he calls Lester Lake. They chat about it, and he says, Lester, he says, he's been with so-and-so. He says, he's been a good 4 years behind the wheel. And then he said this, and not because he was my father, because it was a fact. My father was just the professional's professional.
Yep.
Set the standard. That's the footsteps I had to step in, by the way. He set a very good example. And he was with the right people that knew how to handle and model that example. Not only my father, but there are many there like that. So he says to Mr. Lake, he says, and if he's half as good a driver as his father, he says, we'll still have one of the best. Watch this. I'm standing there, youthful pride, right? And I did not want to hear that. I knew it was circulating in around behind. And by the way, a little thing in here, they didn't even have Sadi's body back to New Jersey yet.
Okay.
Okay? Put that in there. You had to know the game. So anyway, he finishes a phone call as Mr. Biggs. This day I should take myself out behind the woodshed and beat the hell out of myself. I said to Mr. Biggs, and Mr. Biggs says, I need to talk to you about something. What's that? I says, you just made the statement that if I was good as my father, and he looks at me, he almost had a grin. I think he knew it was coming, but he also knew that young Jerry here is being a youthful idiot.
Yep.
And I said, Mr. Biggs says, I want to be hired on my own qualifications. I don't want to be hired on my father's. So he leans back in his chair. He's got a grin on his face. He looks at the paperwork there. He says, okay. He says, I just hired you on your own qualifications. So now the hiring process, I got to take a road test. So we got to go take the physical, that type of thing. I do all that. Watch this. I'm going to go back over to dispatch. Tommy Guy was a dispatcher. Tommy had polio. And he was a dispatcher. They had a chair in there. They'd wheel him around. He'd been there like all of his life. So I went back. Tommy knew me because I was in there with my father a lot. And I says, Mr. Biggs says, you need to get me a road driver's application. So there's shelves under the dispatchers, like a window there. And he and the dock foreman are searching around under the shelves to try to find the applications for road drivers. They finally find it. They go down several copies of applications before they can find one that's clean enough and not dusty enough to actually use.
I'm guessing they did not get a lot of openings there at Interstate.
Well, it wasn't openings. Nobody quit. They were lifetime jobs. That's the way trucking was. This doesn't need to be this way, this high turnover and stuff. I believe in cause and effect kind of thing, right? I'm basically like that. Drill down, drill down, drill down, drill down until you get to bedrock. So now they decide I've got my physical and so on and so forth. To hire me to get my road test now, they have to fly the safety man in from Toledo, Ohio, Rusty Arms. So I meet Rusty down there and they bring around one of the U-model Max, had the twin sticks.
Okay.
Sea-Land Trail. So he just picks out one. He says, you handle that? Now, they did this on purpose. Interstate only had 50 Max left. And a lot of the other companies are kind of working them out at the same time. But they had the old two sticks, the direct transmission and the overdrive, or the auxiliary. And it was kind of like a test. You know, if you can handle the two shift levers, you're 90% higher. Yeah. It was just kind of a little subtle thing that we all knew about. So, and anybody coming up in the industry looked around to see if he could get an opportunity to get in one of these triplex, quadruplex, and duplexes. Because it was probably going to happen if they had Max. So I know that's why he chose that. So we get up in the truck that day, and he doesn't say anything, do what you do. So I knew how to do the checkout and this, that, and the other thing and all that. And he was impressed, by the way. We didn't have electric mirrors. He was impressed that it took me 2 or 3 times getting in and out of the truck to adjust that right mirror. He liked that. And this is a slip seat operation, by the way. You didn't keep the same truck every day. In fact, sometimes you change trucks 2 or 3 times a day, depending on what relay you're going through. Okay? And who the hell cares? It's all trucks. But nobody had a truck. The trucks are a tool. The truck is a tool. It's not who you are. It's a tool to do your business, fundamentally. So here we go. So, and another trick was you had to start off in low gear. In other words, when you take the test, you have to do everything by the book. By the book means starting off low gear and direct and low side on the auxiliary. Now, the problem was I've been driving a triplex at Oneida, and the auxiliary was the opposite in first and second gear on the auxiliary. So I start off in first gear, went to grab and you don't do it with 2 hands. There was a way of split shifting these old transmissions. Then you take your hands off the wheel and go through both levers at the same time. Just don't mess up. If you get caught neutral, you got to stop and start all over. So I started out, and the first shift I made on the auxiliary, I knew it when I started the shift lever. I'm doing it wrong. And oh, by the way, a little fun here. They had to put a box on the right side of the cab for Rusty to sit on. These old line haul outfits, and even today, Old Dominion, ABF, there isn't even a right seat in those trucks. Why the hell do you need a right seat? It's a single operation anyway. So these old trucks are like driving stock cars. We love the death of them. Absolutely nothing fancy. I mean, bare bones. Not even any padded interiors. There's all that leatherette cheap stuff over cardboard and just inside metal. But you didn't quit that job. Today, these jobs are somewhere, if I was making the same thing that I was making then, that would be $130,000 a year job today. So who cares what the inside of the truck looks like? So here we go.
Exactly.
I knew I'd done it wrong, so I stopped and looked at Rusty and I says, I'm used to a triplex. He says, okay, do what you need to do. Put it back in low gear, did my thing. Came back into the yard. We went out around, so forth, through traffic, so on and so forth. Chat a little bit now. He knew my dad. And he'd been a road driver, by the way. You could not be a safety man in interstate motor freight unless you had previous experience as a road driver. Yeah. So, and pretty much with their city dispatchers, too. City dispatcher had always been a city driver first. See the connections and stuff they do? So, anyway, I got back in, got hired.
Great leaders challenge their people not to stop at the first right answer. Tighten the Lug Nuts is the book that will help you move past that first right answer to be more effective, more productive, and more successful. This book serves as a blueprint that can be easily applied by leaders, entrepreneurs, truckers, owner-operators, all of us in our everyday lives. This is one of the best leadership books you can read to help you accelerate towards your personal and professional goals. Plus, a portion of the proceeds will be donated to truckerschristmasgroup.org. Visit TightenTheLugNuts.com to order your copy today. TNCRadio.live is proud to carry the Steve Summers Overnight Drive Show. TNCRadio.live is dedicated to commercial drivers. We offer the news, traffic, and weather you need, and the entertainment, sports, talk, music, and celebrity interviews you want to hear 24/7. We have original shows and trucker podcasts that feature some of your favorites, like Ice Road Alex Debogorski and America's Truckin' Sweetheart Marcia Campbell. TNCRadio.live is convenient and designed for professional drivers. The best part is we're free, and you can listen anywhere you are on the road. With just one tap, you can tune into Steve Summers and us right on your phone. Simply download our app by going to app.tncradio.live. That's app.tncradio.live.
I can remember my first dispatch to Buffalo, New York. And I forget what series international that was, but I remember most of that trip. But see, I didn't have to really learn. I knew how. A lot of the problem for new drivers is they don't know the routine in and around truck stops and terminals and rest plazas. I had all that down. That doesn't make me superior, by the way. It just makes me what? And I knew that as a kid. Experienced. My IQ, I have no more brain cells than anybody else. So to Buffalo, New York. And I knew that, when I checked in there, what was going to go on this, that, and the other, and sent me down. We used to stay at the Statler Hotel in Buffalo, New York. And out of Buffalo, they sent me to Cleveland, Ohio, and back to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was our relay. So that was C Terminal. I got the C Terminal I could hold for home. They had to send me home out of there. So that's kind of the beginning of it. And then I worked out of Carlstadt, New Jersey from 1969 and 1974, more of the interstate system opening up. The carriers were relocating their break bulks and relays. And then I transferred to Milton, Pennsylvania. We call it White Deer. I went in there 20-something years old, number 72 driver on a 250-man board. Seniority was everything. So I worked there, and in around 1980, we could see deregulation had hit.
Before we get into deregulation, I want to ask you a couple real specific questions here real quick. You had mentioned earlier about having to get a medical exam. Was that something that was done by the DOT or the equivalent thereof at the time, or was that just a company exam, or was it like we have now, or how did that work?
Okay, it was ICC, same physical, by the way, and everybody had to do it. The carriers actually had doctors they sent you to. Watch this, the difference in how do I say this? The difference between the quality expectations of management of themselves, by the way, back then, compared to now. So you had to go to the company doctor, go through the physical. And so then you got it was a 2 year, same thing it is now. We need to talk about, because too many drivers get too upset about really not knowing the dirt. I am one of the drivers. That's probably a leader in it. because I went to the FCC first. Right here in Memphis, Tennessee, I found Methodist Occupational Clinic. Another one downtown. A lot of carriers use them all over the country. On the behest of management, a wink-wink thing, they were passing drivers that should have failed their physicals. The industry knew about it, management knew about it, and by the way, the doctors knew about it. The doctors knew that if they failed too many drivers, the carrier would not send the drivers to their clinic anymore. See how our standards dwindled and dwindled and dwindled? That in a macro way, when you begin to break apart, that is the cause of a driver shortage today. All these put together, when you put them in a box, that's what's going on, because it chased the drivers off. So let me go back to the Oneida thing. Because and it saved a very serious wreck one time. I can sit here and see it now. Bud Lake, New Jersey. I will never forget this. It burned in my brain. At Oneida, because we pulled doubles, they had, and we're talking double 40s, eventually double 45s, now still 53s. So it's a long way to the back end of the back trailer. And we didn't have heated mirrors and all that kind of stuff either. So they had probably the most restrictive hiring on process, because remember, they sent me for the lie detector test.
Yep.
So, but they handle a lot of high value cargo too. So I was bonded at that point. So in their test, the safety man took me upstairs. We were in a dark room, and you sat in a wooden chair. And on the table in front of you, they had a oblong box. It was probably 1.5 feet, 2 feet long. And it was a box. And he would open the door on the front of that box, and there was a light inside. And also to his side, he would open a little door. So what you had to do, sit there in that chair that was so many feet from that box, and there were 2 strings, cords. And there was like a little track in there. And inside by his door, there was a dowel. Rounded piece of wood glued into that track. And what you'd have to do, he'd move the movable dowel, and you would have to sit there and line the one dowel up with the other. And you only got so many chances. And he had marks on that track that indicated how far you're off, because nobody's perfect. Well, that was your depth perception test. So then he also had things set there, and it was like the floor of a truck. He had a clutch, a fuel pedal, and a brake mounted on this at an angle, like you're sitting at the wheel. And then he had 3 lights on a dashboard in front of you, and he controlled them. Now remember, this is 1968. What they're doing now is checking your reflexes. So he says, okay, now here's what it was. Green light, you went to fuel pedal. Amber light, you didn't do either. Red light, you went to brake. And he would move this back and forth and move it around. Now, there was no computer or anything hooked up, so, what are you going to do? But he could tell. And that's what he was doing. He was checking your reflexes. Yeah, 1968. Now, remember, when you hire on, seldom does anybody quit. Now, let me stand aside here, and how can I prove that? Because I kept saying that. 1984, right here in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis, Tennessee is one of the top 10 distribution centers in the nation. So therefore, because most of the carriers had operations here, you would have a larger domicile base, which is a fancier word for saying a lot more drivers will live here to work in these operations, right?
Yep.
1984, when Interstate Motor Freight closed up, the big thing then was you went to the classified in the local newspaper, correct? That's where you found jobs. And here we are, one of the top 10 distribution centers in the nation. There were only 4 job openings for drivers or owner-operators in that newspaper. So I says, this is going to change over time. So the next couple of years or so, and if I'm out of town, my wife, she was curious too. We began to count the ads in that newspaper. It went from 4 to 150. Some carriers, truckload carriers now, were running 2 or 3 ads in the same paper. And we quit cutting out, and we quit counting 150.
Hey, thanks for listening to TNC Radio.Live's presentation of Keep On Talkin' with your host, Tom Kirk. For more information or to ask a question or to tell more about your story, send email to info@tncradio.live.